we have a humanitarian crisis at the border, and there's people dying.
What we all hear in news reports or see in newspapers, read online about what happens at the border, I hope we all recognize that these people, they're not a data point, they're human beings.
There's no way that a single place on earth today might consider itself as untouched by migration, or that it's going to be untouched by migration in the future.
We're all immigrants. And, the only people who are not immigrants in Nebraska were the native communities that we displaced. So we have to have a very sincere discussion about immigration.
We need to rethink how we change the narrative of what immigration is for the U.S.
Because of the militarization of the U.S. border and the attempts to block migration, the places people cross have gotten more remote and more dangerous.
These areas are described as hostile terrain.
Prevention through deterrence is a policy that was officially implemented at a national level in 1994. It's a strategy to beef up security and staffing levels of Border Patrol at urban checkpoints, and therefore push migrants, undocumented migrants, into areas that are not urban, harder to cross.
We're talking desert, we're talking crazy temperatures like extreme heat, extreme cold, where the physical elements should act as a deterrent.
So there's a really powerful poem by Warson Shire called Home. She starts this poem, Home, with this. It says, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark."
The vast majority are coming for a better life in the United States, are escaping unstable political situations in Central America, or the rampant gang activity in countries like Honduras and El Salvador.
There is what's called agency. There is the ability of individuals to make their own decisions, but they only make them within a specific set of structures that surround them.
The bigger emotional, empathic understanding comes from trying to put yourself into those shoes and think about what would it take for you to be pushed, or to feel like you have no other choice but to cross like an extremely dangerous desert.
Hostile can be a reference to literally the ecology or the physical environment. Hostile can be a reference to those on the receiving side, in this case, the U.S. Hostile can be a reference to those who sort of see a vulnerable population and a chance to exploit it, coyotes and others on the Mexico side of the border. Hostile can be a reference to the political rhetoric that informs or is the deep backdrop to these kinds of more particular policies, right? Hostile is a very potent word, but it manifests itself in all of these different places.
Hostile Terrain 94 is a global project that was started by the Undocumented Migration Project. Hostile Terrain 94 is using a participatory art exhibition to call attention to the humanitarian crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, particularly the loss of life of migrants in the Sonoran Desert.
Seeing these physical representations of these people and the fact that there's just so many, it's overwhelming and it's heartbreaking, honestly.
We held witnessing and remembrance workshops where more than 300 volunteers across campus and in the Lincoln community and in Omaha filled out information on these toe tags that included the name of migrants, or if they weren't identified, at least there's a tag that represents that person had died. But on the back, some of the volunteers at the witnessing and remembrance workshops wrote notes, personal notes.
On a few of them, I think I wrote things to the effect of, these are real people. These are mothers, sons, daughters, and husbands. These are not just numbers.
you don't necessarily have that same connection just viewing the finished exhibition. So really the process of those workshops was to make those connections more visceral.
I filled out about 10 of the toe tags, and they made me feel very in touch with those people, even though when you are thinking about the issue of immigration across the border, you feel very far removed from it.
It kind of puts like a rock in your stomach. You're like, you just feel that weight.
For maybe like 20 minutes, there was just silence where we were all writing them down, but we were still together, even though it was on Zoom, but it was like a moment of solidarity for those people.
These were then pinned onto this large quilt, geolocated in the position where their remains were found, creating this large map with this really strong concentration of tags right along the U.S.-Mexico border. Hostile Terrain 94 in Nebraska is different from the other 100-some places in the world because we chose to make a quilt.
Quilts really lend themselves to participating in a way in honoring, in offering comfort, warmth, security, solace, like all of the things that the people who perished in the desert did not have, that the quilt is almost in some small way trying to offer that unfortunately after the fact.
We chose to use a gold quilting thread, just horizontal lines, to quilt all the layers, hold all the layers together.
That really was meant to point out the connection of the soil. You know, there's no border on that level. I think also it was a reference to corn. And there's, you know, corn is like a staple, good in Mexico and some parts of Central America and South America. It's obviously been around in the US for a very long time. Native American tribes grew corn. Nebraska obviously is the Cornhusker state. So that was also a kind of subtle reference to that connection.
The other thing that those gold lines reference are textile and weaving traditions from Latin America.
And then the lines themselves are a kind of abstracted reference to serape textiles.
But I think because we made it a mobile exhibition, it has a larger impact.
I hope that it's well visited by all kinds of people, right? Not only those who are personally touched because they have migration history, a direct migration history, but also those who might think that are against some forms of migration. And I'm not saying that it will change minds, but at least it will open the conversation.
Thinking about our own state and Nebraska, we need to think as a state of immigrants and take good steps to, again, protect the people who are the newest members of our society.
Immigration at the border, I think on the face of it, does not seem connected to Nebraska or the Midwest. I think one of our objectives in bringing the exhibition here was to correct that misconception. Part of the purpose for this project is to draw attention to what's happening there, but also to connect it to why people here should be concerned and hopefully take action.
Even with COVID, has really kind of put this specifically into perspective. It's primarily like Latinos who are being affected in these meatpacking towns.
So a lot of Mexican immigrants settled here, especially in western Nebraska, came here in search of economic opportunities and helped make Nebraska one of the leading sugar beet producers in the country.
A lot of the products of Nebraska agriculture are exported to Mexico, to Central America, things like corn and soybeans. So our economic systems are connected to those other parts of the world. So we aren't in a vacuum here.
I think it's easy to want to look at the economic and cultural contributions of Latinos to the state. I think it's important to remember that these are people and they are part of us, and that they don't need to be some huge contributor to our economy to be important.
I mean, when I talk about U.S. or Nebraska responses to newcomer kids, whether it's refugees or economic migrants, I often sort of parse reception into 3 different categories. There's welcome, there's disquiet, or there's xenophobia. And almost every community I've studied in Nebraska has all 3, and so the question is, which voice is loudest and why? Xenophobia exists in multiple forms, but often it's quite overt. And it's the sort of intentionally hostile characterization of newcomer as threat.
What is democracy about, right? What are human rights about? We have to live by these values. We can't just talk about them.
Bad policy kills. And that is what we see in this exodus.
I think that it's important to kind of keep that in mind and to consider the fact that we should just be caring about other people, because it's the right thing to do.
It really brings these very significant issues to the public. Many people don't know about it. And also it talks about global issues. And I think that's its greatest significance. It really connects with many other regions of the world that they're undergoing similar challenges.
Because we're only seeing the end results. We're not seeing, the kinds of traumas that people might have lived through.
It's about to just recognize and acknowledge that this is happening, which I think is a surprise.
I mean, we can't change history, but couldn't it be different in the future, or is this really what we want? I think those are powerful questions to ask. We're a country that has long prided itself in, being exceptional, being different, being better, being fairer, being more equal, or whatever. And those may be myths we tell ourselves, but I think they're also useful things to try to aspire to.
These are not sustainable policies. These are not policies that the American people really are proud of. And no country should be proud of those policies. And we have to end them.